In one of the most volatile flashpoints on Earth, the United States has made a move that could redefine the balance of power in the Middle East. American AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, designed for close combat and precision strikes, have now entered active operations over the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically critical waterways on the planet. This is not a routine deployment. This is escalation. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly 20% of the world's oil supply, making it the single most important energy choke point in global trade. And now, it has effectively become a live combat zone. Reports confirm that U.S. forces, alongside advanced aircraft like A-10 Warthogs, are actively targeting Iranian maritime assets, including fast attack boats and drone systems operating in the region. But what makes this moment different, what makes it dangerous, is not just the presence of American firepower. It's the context. This deployment comes amid a rapidly escalating conflict involving direct strikes, downed aircraft, and rising threats between the United States and Iran. In recent days, multiple U.S. aircraft have reportedly been targeted, while Washington has signaled it is prepared to take even more aggressive action if the strait remains disrupted. And now, Apache helicopters, low-flying, heavily armed, and built for close-range destruction, are being used not just for defense, but for active engagement. That signals a shift from deterrence to confrontation. Military analysts say these helicopters are uniquely suited for this battlefield. They can hunt small, fast-moving boats, intercept drones, and strike targets with surgical precision, all while operating at low altitude in contested airspace. Which raises a critical question. Why now? Why risk deploying such vulnerable yet powerful assets into one of the most heavily defended and politically sensitive regions in the world? Because control of the Strait of Hormuz is not just about regional dominance, it's about global stability. If this waterway remains threatened, or worse, fully closed, the consequences could ripple across the global economy within days. Oil prices could spike, supply chains could fracture, and tensions between major world powers could spiral into something far more dangerous. This is no longer a regional crisis. This is a global turning point. And what happens next could determine whether this conflict is contained or explodes into something far larger. If you want deep, fact-based analysis on the world's most critical geopolitical events, without noise, without speculation, make sure to subscribe now. Because this story is just beginning to understand how Apache helicopters ended up flying combat missions over the Strait of Hormuz. You have to go back decades, long before the current Paran reached its breaking point. This waterway has always been more than just a shipping lane. It is a pressure point, a narrow corridor, just 21 miles wide at its tightest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to global markets. For decades, it has served as both an economic lifeline and a geopolitical fault line, where global energy security and regional rivalries collide. The roots of today's crisis trace back to the late 20th century. Following the 1979 Iranian Revolution, relations between Washington and Tehran collapsed. What followed was a cycle of sanctions, proxy conflicts, and periodic Alaskaria confrontations that never fully escalated into open war, but never truly resolved either. The Strait of Hormuz quickly became a central lever in this rivalry. During the 1980s Iran-Iraq War, both sides targeted oil tankers in what became known as the Tanker War. The United States intervened to protect shipping lanes, escorting vessels and engaging Iranian forces directly. It was one of the earliest indications that Hormuz could become a battlefield with global consequences. Fast forward to the 21st century. Tensions intensified as Iran expanded its missile program and developed asymmetric naval tactics, relying on swarms of fast attack boats, sea mines, and drones designed to disrupt much larger naval forces. The strategy was clear. If Iran could not match the United States conventionally, it could make the strait too dangerous to operate in. And that strategy has been tested repeatedly. Day 1. Rising tensions. In recent weeks, reports began surfacing of increased Iranian naval patrols and drone surveillance near key shipping routes. Commercial vessels reported close encounters, while intelligence sources warned of a potential escalation. Day 3. First confrontations. U.S. naval forces in the region intercepted multiple fast-moving boats approaching commercial tankers. Warning shots were reportedly fired. At the same time, unidentified drones were tracked entering restricted airspace. Day 5. Direct engagement. The situation escalated further when U.S. aircraft reportedly engaged hostile maritime targets. This marked a shift from defensive posturing to active confrontation. Day 7. Air assets deployed. As tensions intensified, the United States deployed additional air support, including A-10 Warthogs and, critically, AH-64 Apache helicopters. These platforms are specifically designed for close-range, high-precision combat in contested environments. This was the turning point. The arrival of Apaches signaled that Washington was preparing not just to defend the strait, but to control it. Meanwhile, Iran has framed these developments as provocation. Officials in Tehran have repeatedly warned that any foreign military presence threatening its territorial waters would be met with force. Iranian state media has emphasized its readiness to respond, highlighting missile systems, naval capabilities, and regional alliances. Now, the major actors are fully engaged. The United States, seeking to secure global shipping routes and maintain freedom of navigation. Iran, determined to assert its influence and resist what it views as external pressure. And the rest of the world, watching closely, aware that any miscalculation in this narrow stretch of water could trigger consequences far beyond the region. Because history has shown one thing clearly: the Strait of Hormuz is never just about the Strait of Hormuz. It is about power. It is about leverage. And increasingly, it is about the risk of escalation. What exactly happened in the Strait of Hormuz? And why has this moment triggered such global alarm? To answer that, we have to move beyond headlines and examine the event itself, step by step. Because in a conflict like this, the details are everything, and the truth is often contested. Phase 1. Detection. According to U.S. defense sources, the sequence began with increased surveillance activity over the strait. American naval vessels and reconnaissance aircraft detected multiple fast-moving Iranian boats operating unusually close to international shipping lanes. At the same time, airborne radar systems picked up unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, entering sensitive zones near commercial tankers. Individually, these incidents were not unprecedented, but together, they suggested coordination. Phase 2. Interception. U.S. naval forces responded first. Warships in the Ilmintica issued radio warnings to approaching vessels, instructing them to change course. In several cases, those warnings were ignored. According to official accounts, American ships then fired warning shots, a standard escalation measure designed to deter without engaging. But the situation did not de-escalate. Instead, the boats reportedly continued maneuvering at high speed, closing distance with both military and civilian vessels. This is where the situation crossed a threshold. Phase 3. Engagement. With tensions rising, U.S. command authorized limited engagement. Aircraft already in the region, most notably A-10 Warthogs, were tasked with monitoring and, if necessary, neutralizing perceived threats. Shortly afterward, reports emerged of strikes targeting specific maritime assets believed to be operating aggressively within the strait. Then came the decisive escalation. AH-64 Apache helicopters were deployed into the airspace. Unlike high-altitude jets, Apaches operate low and close. They are designed to identify, track, and engage small, fast-moving targets, precisely the kind of vessels involved in this confrontation. Within hours, multiple engagements were reported. While exact details remain classified, U.S. sources suggest that several hostile boats were disabled. Drone activity in the immediate area reportedly decreased following these operations. But Iran tells a different story. Tehran's official narrative rejects the idea of aggression. Iranian state media claims its naval forces were conducting routine patrols within their territorial waters. According to this version, it was the United States that escalated the situation, introducing attack helicopters and initiating strikes in what Iran considers a defensive zone. Iranian officials have also questioned the legitimacy of U.S. claims regarding drone threats, suggesting that these reports are being used to justify increased military presence in the region. So, what do we actually know? We know that U.S. forces engaged targets in and around the Strait of Hormuz. We know that Apache helicopters were deployed in a combat role, marking a significant escalation in tactical posture. We know that both sides are presenting sharply different accounts of what triggered the confrontation. And we know that independent verification remains limited. Satellite imagery, commercial shipping data, and fragmented intelligence leaks provide pieces of the puzzle, but not the full picture. In a region where information is tightly controlled and narratives are strategically shaped, certainty is difficult to achieve. Which leaves us with a critical reality. This is not just a military confrontation. It is an information battle. Two sides, two narratives, one extremely narrow waterway. And somewhere in between lies the truth, along with the risk that the next incident may not remain contained. To understand why the deployment of Apache helicopters into the Strait of Hormuz is such a critical moment, you have to look beyond the Gutna itself and focus on the battlefield. Because this is not just any location. This is one of the most strategically vital corridors on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is the gateway between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean. Every day, millions of barrels of oil pass through this narrow channel, feeding economies across Asia, Europe, and North America. There are few alternatives, fewer still that can absorb disruption at scale, which means control of this strait is not just a regional objective, it is a global strategic asset. From a military standpoint, the geography alone makes it uniquely dangerous. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide. Shipping lanes are even tighter, just a few miles across in each direction. That creates a confined environment where even small disruptions can have outsized consequences. For Iran, this geography is an advantage. Its coastline runs along the northern edge of the strait, giving it proximity and familiarity. Over decades, Iran has built a strategy designed specifically for this terrain, relying on speed, surprise, and saturation. Fast attack boats, coastal missile systems, naval mines, unmanned drones. Individually, these assets are limited, but combined, they form an asymmetric shupka capable of overwhelming even advanced naval forces, especially in confined waters where maneuverability is restricted. For the United States, the challenge is different. Its objective is not to control the strait, but to keep it open. That requires constant surveillance, rapid response capability, and the ability to neutralize threats before they disrupt shipping. Traditionally, this mission has relied heavily on large naval assets, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and high-altitude aircraft. But those platforms have limitations in this environment. They are powerful, but not always precise. And that is where the Apache helicopters come in. The AH-64 Apache is not designed for broad, strategic bombing. It is built for targeted, close-range engagement. It can identify small boats, track them in real time, and strike with precision-guided munitions. It can operate at low altitude, below radar coverage, and respond quickly to fast-moving threats. In the context of the Strait of Hormuz, that capability is decisive. It allows the United States to counter Iran's asymmetric tactics on equal terms. Boat against helicopter, drone against precision strike. But this also introduces new risks. Low-altitude operations mean higher vulnerability. Apaches operating in contested airspace are exposed to surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft fire, and electronic warfare systems. In other words, while they enhance tactical capability, they also raise the stakes of every engagement. And that is the core of the strategic shift. This is no longer about distant deterrence. This is about close contact confrontation in one of the most sensitive military environments in the world. A single miscalculation, a misidentified vessel, a delayed response, a weapon fired too soon, could trigger a chain reaction that extends far beyond the strait itself. Because in this narrow corridor, strategy and risk are tightly compressed, and every move carries global consequences. As the situation in the Strait of Hormuz intensifies, the focus now shifts from what happened to what it means. And for that, analysts, intelligence agencies, and military experts are offering increasingly urgent assessments. Because from their perspective, this is not an isolated incident. It is a signal. According to intelligence assessments, the deployment of AH-64 Apache helicopters suggests a deliberate shift in U.S. operational doctrine in the region. Rather than relying solely on large-scale naval deterrence, the United States appears to be moving toward a more flexible, rapid response posture, one designed to counter Iran's asymmetric tactics in real time. This is a significant adjustment. Experts at major international security institutes argue that traditional naval power, aircraft carriers, destroyers, while dominant, is not always effective against small, agile threats like fast attack boats and drones. These targets require speed, precision, and constant presence. The Apache provides exactly that. Military analysts note that the helicopter's ability to operate at low altitude and engage multiple targets quickly makes it particularly effective in confined environments like the Strait of Hormuz. It essentially fills a tactical gap, bridging the space between high-altitude air power and surface-level naval operations. But that capability comes with a warning. Low-altitude engagement increases exposure, one defense analyst explained. You gain precision, but you also increase vulnerability. And in a contested zone like Hormuz, that risk is amplified. Intelligence sources also point to another critical factor: intent. Some assessments suggest that Iran's recent maneuvers may not have been random acts of aggression, but calculated probes, tests designed to measure response times, identify weaknesses, and gather intelligence on U.S. operational patterns. If that is the case, then the deployment of Apaches is not just reactive. It is a message. A message that the United States is willing to escalate tactically in order to maintain control over the strait. Meanwhile, regional experts are closely watching how other global powers interpret these developments. Russia and China, both with significant energy interests tied to the strait, have historically advocated for de-escalation, but have also criticized increased U.S. military presence in the region. Analysts warn that any prolonged confrontation could draw these actors into the diplomatic or even strategic equation. And then there is the economic intelligence. Market analysts are already monitoring fluctuations in oil prices, shipping insurance rates, and maritime risk assessments. Even the perception of instability in the strait can trigger ripple effects across global markets, which means the Alaskari situation is now directly influencing economic calculations worldwide. But perhaps the most critical insight from experts is this: this moment is fragile. Not because of what has already happened, but because of what could happen next. When military forces operate in close proximity, under high tension, with competing narratives and limited communication, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. And history shows that in such environments, escalation is often not a matter of intention, but of miscalculation. That is what concerns analysts most, not a planned conflict, but an accidental one. Because in the Strait of Hormuz today, the line between deterrence and al-harb is becoming increasingly difficult to see. But the other side has a point. While Washington frames its actions as a necessary response to protect global shipping and maintain freedom of navigation, Iran, and a number of independent observers, see the situation very differently. From Tehran's perspective, this is not a defensive operation. It is escalation. Iranian officials argue that their naval forces were operating within or near their own territorial waters, conducting routine patrols in a region where they have a long-established presence. In this interpretation, the arrival of U.S. attack helicopters, combined with reported airstrikes, represents a deliberate show of force designed to pressure and provoke. This narrative is not isolated. Some geopolitical analysts suggest that the United States may be engaging in what is known as escalation dominance, a strategy aimed at overwhelming an opponent's ability to respond by introducing superior force at critical moments. The goal is not necessarily to trigger conflict, but to shape behavior through visible, undeniable military advantage. In that context, the deployment of Apache helicopters sends a clear signal. The United States is willing to operate at closer range, with more aggressive tactics, in order to control the operational environment. But critics warn that this approach carries significant risks, because what one side views as deterrence, the other may interpret as provocation. And in a region as sensitive as the Strait of Hormuz, perception can be as powerful as reality. There is also the question of misinterpretation. In fast-moving maritime environments, where small vessels maneuver at high speeds and communication is often limited or delayed, distinguishing between routine activity and hostile intent can be extremely difficult. A patrol boat may appear aggressive, a drone may be misidentified, a defensive maneuver may be seen as preparation for attack. These ambiguities create space for error, and error, in this context, can escalate quickly. Some diplomatic analysts point to missed opportunities for de-escalation. Back-channel communications, historically used to manage tensions between adversaries, appear limited or strained. Without clear lines of communication, even minor incidents can spiral into larger confrontations. There is also a broader political dimension. Domestic pressures on both sides may be shaping decisions on the ground. In the United States, demonstrating strength in a critical global choke point reinforces credibility with allies. In Iran, resisting foreign military presence reinforces sovereignty and national resolve. These internal dynamics can reduce flexibility. They can make compromise more difficult, and they can push both sides toward actions that prioritize perception over restraint. Even among Western analysts, there is debate. Some argue that increased military presence is necessary to prevent disruption in global trade. Others warn that such deployments may inadvertently increase the likelihood of confrontation by compressing reaction times and raising operational tempo. In other words, the very measures designed to stabilize the situation could, under certain conditions, destabilize it further. Which brings us to a central question. Is this a controlled demonstration of power? Or the early stage of a conflict that neither side fully intends? At this moment, the answer remains uncertain. But what is clear is that the Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a contested space. It is a space where interpretation, perception, and miscalculation carry as much weight as military capability itself. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz does not stay in the Strait of Hormuz. It reverberates outward, through global markets, military alliances, and into the daily lives of millions of people who may never even see this narrow stretch of water. Because this is not just a Razmakhan flashpoint, it is an economic artery. Nearly one-fifth of the world's oil supply moves through this corridor. Tankers carrying crude oil and liquefied natural gas pass through its shipping lanes every single day. Any disruption, real or perceived, immediately triggers reactions across global energy markets. And those reactions are already beginning. Energy analysts warn that even a temporary escalation can push oil prices sharply higher. Not necessarily because supply has been cut, but because risk has increased. Insurance premiums for shipping companies rise. Transit routes become more uncertain. Traders begin pricing in the possibility of disruption, and that uncertainty has consequences. If oil prices surge, transportation costs follow. Airlines, shipping companies, and logistics networks all face higher fuel expenses. Those costs are then passed on into the price of goods, services, and everyday essentials. For viewers, that translates into something very real: higher fuel prices, rising cost of living, increased economic pressure. But the impact does not stop at economics. There are military consequences as well. As tensions escalate, the United States may reinforce its presence in the region, deploying additional naval assets, air defense systems, and surveillance platforms. Allies may be drawn in, either through direct cooperation or strategic alignment. At the same time, Iran could respond by increasing its own military readiness, expanding patrols, activating missile systems, or conducting exercises designed to signal capability and resolve. This creates a cycle. Action leads to reaction. Reaction leads to counteraction. And with each step, the risk of miscalculation grows. Then there is the geopolitical dimension. Major global powers are watching closely. China, heavily dependent on energy imports flowing through the strait, has a direct interest in stability. Russia, while benefiting from higher energy prices, also has strategic calculations tied to regional influence and global positioning. Meanwhile, European nations, already navigating complex energy challenges, face renewed uncertainty. And NATO, while not directly engaged, must consider the broader implications of instability in a region so critical to global supply chains. This is how a localized crisis becomes global, not through a single event, but through interconnected systems that amplify its effects. Markets respond, governments react, alliances shift, and for the average viewer, the connection may not be immediately visible, but it is undeniably present. A spike at the gas pump, an increase in shipping delays, a subtle rise in prices across everyday goods, all linked in part to decisions being made thousands of miles away, which is why this moment matters. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a distant geopolitical hotspot, it is a pressure point in a global system that affects everyone. And as tensions continue to rise, the question is no longer whether there will be consequences. It is how far those consequences will reach. As the situation in the Strait of Hormuz continues to evolve, attention now turns to what happens next. Because while the current phase has already marked a significant escalation, the most important developments may still lie ahead. Several key indicators will determine the trajectory of this crisis. First, diplomatic activity. Behind the scenes, there may be attempts to re-establish communication channels between the United States and Iran, either directly or through intermediaries. Historically, such back-channel diplomacy has played a crucial role in preventing isolated incidents from spiraling into broader conflict. Any upcoming meetings, statements, or third-party mediation efforts will be closely watched. Second, military posture. Future movements of naval assets, air deployments, and surveillance operations will signal intent. An increase in defensive positioning could suggest preparation for continued tension, while a reduction in visible presence might indicate a shift toward de-escalation. Third, intelligence developments. New assessments, whether from satellite imagery, intercepted communications, or allied reporting, could either clarify or further complicate the picture. In conflicts like this, intelligence often shapes both strategy and perception. So where does this leave us? What is confirmed is that U.S. forces have deployed advanced air assets, including AH-64 Apache helicopters, into an active operational environment near the Strait of Hormuz. What is also clear is that interactions between U.S. and Iranian forces have intensified, with both sides presenting competing narratives about the nature of these engagements. What remains uncertain is the long-term intent behind these actions, and whether current tensions will stabilize or continue to escalate. Looking ahead, two primary scenarios emerge. In the first scenario, diplomatic pressure and strategic caution lead to de-escalation. Military forces maintain a strong presence, but direct engagements are reduced. Communication channels are reopened, and the Strait of Hormuz remains open under heightened security but without sustained conflict. In the second scenario, a single incident, misidentification, miscalculation, or unintended engagement triggers a chain reaction. Additional forces are deployed, retaliatory actions follow, and the situation expands beyond localized encounters into a broader regional confrontation. At this stage, neither outcome is guaranteed. What is clear is that the margin for error is narrow, extremely narrow. Because in a region where military forces operate in close proximity, where geopolitical interests intersect, and where global energy flows depend on stability, even small decisions can carry disproportionate consequences. The Strait of Hormuz has long been a symbol of strategic tension. Today, it is also a test of restraint, a test of strategy, and a test of how far global powers are willing to go to assert control without crossing the line into full-scale conflict. And as this situation develops, one reality remains constant: the world will be watching every move. For continued updates, deeper analysis, and real-time breakdowns of unfolding geopolitical events, make sure to subscribe. Because in moments like this, understanding what happens next is not just important, it is essential.